So today we are going to start Moses, that is chapter 4. And we are going to start with the call of Moses. Mostly you're told to narrate about the call of Moses. So Moses was looking after the flock of his father-in-law Jethro when the Lord appeared to him. An angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire amidst a bush. And you have to note that the bush was not getting consumed, yet it was doing what? It was getting burned. So when Moses knew closer, he moved closer, and God called him and told him to remove what? His shoes, because where he was standing was a holy ground. This meant that Moses was Asante sana. So we are talking about the important areas that you should mention in the call of Moses. We said that Moses was looking after the flock of his father-in-law Jethro when the Lord appeared to him. So an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire in the midst of bush. That is, there was a burning bush, yet it was not being consumed. And when Moses moved closer, he was told by God to do what? To remove his shoes, because he was standing in a holy ground. This meant that Moses was symbolically naked, that he had nothing to hide before God. And the removing of the shoes, if you're asked, it meant it is a beginning of new life for Moses. That is, sins were also being forgiven. So God told him he was God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. But God told him that he had seen the suffering of the people, and he had also remembered his promise to give the Israelites the promised land. So in the call, Moses complained that he was an outcast in Egypt, and that Pharaoh could not accept him. But God assured him that, number one, he would be with him. Yes. And he also told him that who his name was. That his name was what? I am who I am, right? So this meant that God was beyond human description. So it was God gave him a miracle to perform to who? To Pharaoh, right? In order to prove that he was God's messenger. Number one, he was told to use a rod, which turned into a what? A snake. Then he was told to place his hand in his pocket, and on putting it out, it was affected by what? Leprosy. So Moses still complained to God that he was not an eloquent speaker, or rather you can just say he was a stammerer. So God told him that his brother Aaron was going to be his what? Spokesman. So Moses went back to Jethro's home and gathered his family members and started his journey to Egypt. So, what lessons did Moses learn about God from his call? Number one, God is holy. He was told to remove the what? The shoes. God is loving and caring. He knew the people in Egypt were suffering, so he was sending where? He was sending Moses there. God keeps his promise. He remembered the promise of what? The land that he was going to give them. God is beyond human understanding. Also, God chooses whoever he wills to carry out his plan. God also expects total obedience. Whoever he chooses, he wants you to be what? To have total obedience. Also, God punishes his enemies. We also learn that God protects his people. He tried to protect Moses from who? From Pharaoh. That's why he told him what to perform so that he can be believed. Why Moses was reluctant to God to go back to Egypt? This one is also asked. Why was he reluctant to go back to Egypt? Yes, he thought that the Israelites would not believe him. The Israelites, yes. Number two, he was an outcast in Egypt because he had killed a what? An Egyptian. He was a stammerer. Or that you can say he was not an eloquent what? Speaker. He was also afraid to face who? Pharaoh. And then he felt that he was nobody to stand before Pharaoh. And then he had not had a clear understanding of God. So he did not know the God who was doing what? Who was sending him. So the Passover and the Exodus. And this is Exodus chapter 7 from verse 14 to chapter 11. So we cannot read. So tell me the plagues, the way they follow each other. The first plague was water into blood. Yes. The second, frogs. Yes, very good. The third, gnats. The fourth, flies. Then death of livestock. Then boils. Then hailstorm. Then locust. Then plague of darkness. And then the 10th plague was the death of the what? Firstborn sons of the Egyptians. Yes, they started dying from the son of Pharaoh. So, on the 10th month, each man was supposed to choose what? Either a lamb or a young goat. And it should be a year old without blemish. So now we want to talk about the Passover. So preparations for the Passover, that is, for the night of the Passover, what were they supposed to do? There are a few things that they were supposed to take. I said number one, they were to, each house was supposed to choose what? A lamb or a young goat, which was male, without what? Blemish. And then it was supposed to be killed, and the blood of the animal was supposed to be smeared on the doorposts. And then the blood was to show houses of the what? That blood. You remember that. Also, the sacrifice was to be roasted what? Whole. Because it was the quickest method of what? Of cooking, to show that they were in a hurry. Also, the meat was eaten that night with an unleavened bread, to show that the Israelites had no time to leaven the bread. Also, the unleavened bread was to be taken with bitter what? Herbs, to symbolize the oppression or the slavery they were subjected to in Egypt. And they were to eat the sacrificial meat while dressed, and when they had packed their what? Their luggage. The Israelite women were to ask jewelry from who? From the Egyptian women. So they asked for jewelry made from silver and gold. This was to act as compensation, because sometimes you are told what? You were told to explain why they were to borrow the jewelry. So this was compensation for the work they done in where? In Egypt. Yes, and then the Passover was to be commemorated annually. That is every year. So, how was the Passover commemorated in the Promised Land? How was it commemorated on the number one? They celebrated annually in the 14th day of the first month of the year. They took bitter herbs to remind them the bitterness of slavery in Egypt. They were also to take unleavened bread. They also lived near the temple, to go to the temple for celebrations. And they also slaughtered a lamb to remind them the sacrificial lamb in Egypt. And on this day of the Passover, they were not supposed to do any work. And when the children asked the meaning of the event, the elders were supposed to do what? To tell it to them. Lessons Christians can learn about God from the plagues. We talked about the plagues. What can you learn? God is more powerful than the Egyptian what? Gods. Also, God punishes the wrongdoers. So he rescues people. That is the people he loves, his own people. God answers people's prayers. And then God works through the prophets or the people of God. So, the background of Moses, how the background of Moses prepared him for future leadership. This one also is asked. How is his background? How did his background prepare him to be a what? A leader. Number one, he was spared when he was rescued by who? Pharaoh's what? Daughter. When he was young, he was brought up in Pharaoh's what? Palace. In the palace, he was under care of his mother, who told him that he was what? He was not an Egyptian, but a what? An Israelite. Also, he escaped to Midian, where he faced a rough time and hard life, which prepared him for the hardship that he was going to face in the wilderness later when he was leading the Israelites. Remember when he killed the Egyptian, he escaped to where? To Midian. That is where he faced rough time and hard life to prepare himself for the wilderness. Also, he was his father-in-law's Jethro. He looked after the sheep. Therefore, meant that he could lead what? Human beings. Also, he lived with Jethro, the priest of Midian. He therefore learned priesthood. Also, he was married before God called him. So he married before God called him. That means that he was able to solve social problems of the Israelites. Also, he was no stranger to Pharaoh and Egypt. Therefore, he could approach what? Pharaoh after encouragement from God. Reasons why the Israelites left Egypt. Why did they leave Egypt? Number one, because they wanted to worship God in the wilderness. The new Pharaoh did not know Joseph, so he started oppressing the what? The Israelites. That's why they left Egypt. Also, they left because of the suffering they were subjected to. And also, the Egyptian rulers felt that the Israelites could join their what? Their enemies and defeat them. That's why they had to leave Egypt. Also, the Israelites had cried to God, who heard their what? Their prayers. And also the Israelites had to leave Egypt because they had increased in number. Due to the increase in number, they were a threat to the Egyptians. And then they had to leave Egypt because it was fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham that his descendants will be enslaved for 400 years in a foreign land, but God would take them out and give them what? The promised land. How the power of God was experienced during the crossing of the sea. So here you're supposed to talk when they were crossing and immediately after doing what? Crossing. So number one, at daytime, they were guarded by a pillar of cloud, and night a pillar of what? Fire. But now while crossing, God instructed Moses to lift what? His rod above the water and separated it into what? Into two. That is how he protected them. He also threw Egyptian army into confusion. Also, the wheels of the chariots came off. So it was difficult for them to drive. The wheels of the chariots came off, so it was difficulty in driving. The Israelites walked through dry land. That is how the power of God was seen. And then also you have to indicate that after they passed, Moses stretched the rod and the waters lowered back, killing the what? The chariots of the Egyptians. The covenant at Mount Sinai. So preparations. So the preparations that the Israelites made before meeting God. This is Exodus chapter 19. Can we read?
on the day that they came into the wilderness of Sinai.
And when they set out from Rephidim and came into the wilderness of Sinai, they encamped in the wilderness, and their Israel encamped before the mountain.
And Moses went up to God, and the Lord God called him out of the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say of Israel, you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel, you have seen that I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you with wings and brought to myself. Now therefore, if you will obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my own people among all people of all the eyes of the earth.
And you shall be to me a king and a priest, and call me God." These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel.
So Moses came and called the elders of Egypt, and said before them all this work which the Lord has commanded you. And all the people answered again and said, "Whatever the Lord has spoken, we will do."
And Moses reported the word to the people, to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, "Look, I am coming and you keep quiet, and the people may hear when I speak with you, and they may also believe you." And then Moses told them,
What is wrong with you? We are reading one verse. Where are you going?
And the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them know their journey. And be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people.
And you shall set one to the people round about, saying, take heed that you do not go up into the mountain or touch the god of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death."
After Moses was gone down the mountain, the people, "You shall surely be stoned or shot with arrows. This act is to be laid on you. Among all animals, you shall not be permitted to eat. Only one death and thunder, one blood, is therefore captive order."
So Moses went out from the mountain, and the people were washed their garments.
And he said to the people, be ready by the third day, do not go near a woman.
And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet his God, and they stood at the new bank of the mountain.
And Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke, because the Lord descended upon the meat in fire, and the smoke of which went up like the smoke of a flame, and the whole mountain wrapped greatly.
And the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain. And the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain. And Moses went up.
And the Lord said to Moses, go down and warn the people. You take great care to the Lord to please and none of them favor.
And also made the priest to come to the Lord, they felt upon them.
And Moses said to the Lord, the people cannot come up to the Mount Sinai, for they forsake this change us, saying, Set bound about the mountain, and consecrate it.
And the Lord said to him, Go down and come up, bringing Aaron with you. But do not let the priests and the people break through to come up the rock, lest he break out against them.
So Moses went down to the people